I'm going to take the next hour and 15 minutes or so. I know I don't want to cut into lunch too much. We have 1 hour for lunch, and it's been my experience with lunchtime at throws camps and throws clinics, you need an hour and a half. So, want to make sure we do that right. Anyway, I'm going to talk about my take on shot put training, some of the things that I do with my group and what I've done over the years. I've been coaching 24 years now. This is my 24th year of coaching. And I've coached at all different levels over the United States as far as the high school system, junior college system, and the university system as well. And obviously I've been coaching open athletes or post-collegiate athletes in the U.S. for about the last 9 years as well too. So kind of want to share with you my thoughts and experiences, and we'll kind of go from there. If anybody has any questions, please let me know. And obviously, I'll be here for the next 2 days as well, so in between sessions and things like that, feel free to ask me anything you'd like, okay? I'm going to use this PowerPoint presentation here to kind of give my talk, and this is actually a talk that I gave at the U.S. High Performance Summit actually earlier this week. So before I was in Atlantic City a few days ago, I was actually in Las Vegas, Nevada at the beginning of last week. So I've been on the road for about 6 days. And believe it or not, I'm actually coming back over to Europe middle of next week for vacation. So getting a lot of frequent flyer miles in. Anyway, first of all, just with when I'm looking at training and shot put training specifically, one of the main things when I'm developing athletes that I really want to pay attention to when developing their technique is to have develop the speed and strength and the technique in unison. You want to have a balance or harmony in between all those elements. And I know one of the things that we do sometimes, and I mean this has happened to me obviously before, and it happens to a lot of people, is you get one or more of those elements out of balance. One element's a little bit too much developed, it'll throw off the other elements. So, and for example, I've seen people really focus on strength a little bit too much too early on, and the thrower gets too strong for the implement. They can't feel the implement. They end up throwing from a position of strength rather than feel. I think it's much more important, especially something like with the rotational shot, but obviously all throwing events, to really throw off a feel and then add the strength in later on. So, and obviously what you need to do is look at athletes, and every athlete's a little bit different. Some are going to be naturally very fast, some are naturally very slow, some are naturally very strong, some are fairly weak, some are not very flexible, some are very flexible, and you have to try to balance those out. Some of the elements you're not going to have to work on very much. Some people get strong very fast. You might only need to weight train them once, twice a week to get the same amount of gains that you might have to train somebody 3 or 4 times a week in the same in the same area. You want to make sure, this is up here, point number 2, that all facets of training are developed together. So we're talking, and these are just some of them: speed, absolute strength, special strength, flexibility, and technique. What I do is look at an individual athlete, make an assessment of all these different areas, and then develop the training plan there. And as Shaun said, I've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of good athletes in a lot of different events. So I don't just coach just one system. I've been around the world, talked to a lot of different coaches, been to a lot of different seminars all around the world, and obviously realize there's more than one way to skin a cat. And I think it's good to know a lot of different systems and be able to take parts of each different system and use them in your own personal system when you're writing a training program for a thrower. Now, the one main question when you're putting together a training program is how much is enough for each parameter. And just remember here, more is not necessarily better. I usually err on the side of not enough, okay? I've always kind of said if you're overtrained, there's no way you can throw a personal best. If you're undertrained, there's a possibility you could throw a personal best. And it's very easy to get overtrained. And again, I've overtrained athletes many, many times, and obviously you learn from your mistakes. But you need to figure out how much is enough for each parameter. And obviously that's going to be an individual question for each athlete. So there's no set cookie cutter formula, but there are some certain guidelines, I think, and I'm going to talk about those a little bit in just a bit. Now this is mainly for shot put training here. And I look at this as kind of a breakdown in terms of the time spent in training. And this is like generally, within a given week, we probably spend about 40% of our time throwing or doing some type of throwing drills. And I'll say this with the throwing drills, somebody like Reese Hoffa, who's obviously a very advanced thrower, we hardly do any drills at all at this point. We used to do a lot of drills when he's younger, but we can go right into the throwing right away. Honestly, we don't do very many drills right now, and he gets along just fine. That's not to say if you're an advanced thrower you don't need to do drills, but he's pretty good without them. With Reese, for example, we every January I have a throwing clinic that I host for the local high school coaches in Georgia, and we get about 70, 80 coaches each year. And Reese is one of my demonstrators, and we'll go through all the batteries of drills that you can do to troubleshoot technique. And Reese will come out and do these drills perfectly right off the bat. He hasn't done, the last time he did them before that clinic was the clinic the year before. So, he has all the drills down. I have other throwers, they need to do lots of drills. They always need to be reminded what to do. With general strength and special strength training, we probably spend about 35% of our time in terms of hours a week in that area. Now with special strength, one of probably the most specific special strength exercise you have for shot putting is throwing heavy shots. And, I would say usually I count throwing heavy shots in that special strength category there. I wouldn't put that in the throwing drills category so much. And we spend about 15% of our time running, sprinting, and or jumping. We tend to do little bouts of running, sprinting, and jumping kind of peppered throughout the program. We don't have big, long, drawn-out training in that realm. And then probably 10% specifically on agility and flexibility. And what I'll do later on in this presentation is I'll show you some of the exercises we do. Not all of the exercises by any means, but some of the exercises that we do for each one of these areas right here. Okay, first of all, I want to talk about lifting parameters for elite throwers. And what I mean by elite here basically is about 20 meters for the men's shot, about 18 meters or so for the women's shot. Right here is some numbers here that I've put up for the men. The next slide is going to be for the women. And what we have up top here, actually, I'm going to use my pointer. What we have up top in this area right here is kind of a scale that I've kind of made up. And again, this isn't a hard, fast scale right here. It's a general outline of the numbers that I'm looking at when we're developing our strength. And obviously it's a sliding scale too. So, and this is in terms of body weight. Basically, right here what this means is for a thrower that's 225 pounds, and there aren't very many 20-meter shot putters, they're only 225. Most of them are more in the 120 kilogram, 264 pound range and on up to what's Vodovnik, 170 kilos from Slovenia, on the top end. These are the percentages that I'm looking at that will probably be necessary as far as weightlifting in terms of body weight percentages that you need to hit that. Obviously, as you get heavier, those percentages go down of body weight. So, what I'm looking at here is, again, this is about how much is enough. And basically, if you're looking at a 225-pound thrower, you look at 175% of their body weight, you're probably looking at about 425-pound bench press, something like that. Back squat, probably a little over double body weight there. Clean, 160% of body weight. Snatch, 110% of body weight. And push jerk, 155%. And obviously, as you get heavier, the percentages go down. Now, you may look at these numbers and go, that's not that much weight from what I hear about numbers for people lifting. They're throwing 20 meters. That's not that strong. But this is also in conjunction with having a good vertical leap, a good sprint, good flexibility, and very good technique. Okay? This isn't just throwing off a strength. Okay, and now let me give you some examples right here. And these a lot of the throwers I've worked with. Brent Noon I didn't really work with, but he was around Georgia at the time. Got to talk to him quite a bit. And Brent Noon is throwing 21.47. He was 5th place at the 1995 World Championships in the shot put. Almost all these throwers here, Nelson, Hoffa, Noon, Miller, Williams, are all spinners. Brad Snyder's a glider. Brad Snyder's the Canadian record holder at 20 meters 86. But Adam Nelson at 260 pounds, his bench press, his personal best is about 192% of his body weight. So he's on the high side compared to these numbers here, but then again, his best is 22.5 meters. And he's had a couple fouls and a couple warm-up throws at 75 feet, about 2280, 2290. So he's made the shot go very, very far. And again, these aren't Brian Oldfield-like blowout throws where he ends up 10, 15 feet out into the landing area. These are little tiny foot fouls that were maybe stepped over by 1 inch. So he was generating a lot of power. Adam, for example, his bench press when he was younger, and he used to do a lot of just crazy get after it training when he was younger. He did 385 pounds for a set of 18 in the bench press. So, and his max at the time, again, was 500, which is basically what that 192% of his body weight is. So he doesn't lift quite like that anymore. Obviously, he gets older. He did that when he was 22 years old or so in college in his young and crazy days, in more ways than one. So Adam's his back squat here is 269% of his body weight. So obviously this is well above what I have in my chart there. But there again, he's a very special athlete and world champion, and he's very strong thrower. He's done a set of 3 to 144% of his body weight in the clean, and 3 times 100% of his body weight in the snatch. Now you look at that and go, well, that's not that strong compared to the other lifts. He's had some shoulder problems and things like that, so he's never really challenged the snatch very much because of his injuries and shoulder problems he's had over the years. And there again, just because sometimes you have to adapt your training to work around injuries. Now Reese Hoffa is a lot heavier. He's about 305 pounds. He's actually right now he's 141 kilograms. He's about 310 pounds right now. You can see his bench press, for example, is 159% of his body weight, and so that's a little bit above the numbers that I'd have up here in my chart. At 300, I said about 155. He's about 159. So what does that, now with Reese's training, what does that mean? Basically, we get to about 159% of body weight is about 480 pounds. We work on Reese's bench, get up to about 480 pounds, then we just maintain it. We're not trying to get 500, 510, 525. We just don't really see a need. 480 is enough that we've seen with his training for it to go far enough. So I know in the past I've been exposed to formulas, where people say, when I was at UCLA way back in the 80s, when John Brenner was throwing, we had a formula scribbled up on the wall. It said 300-pound snatch, 400-pound clean, 500-pound bench, and 600-pound squat equals 70 feet. And maybe for a glider, that's maybe what you need for 70 feet, depending on what size you are. But just because you get those numbers doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get the distance. You have to look at what's happening in the ring. And I think a lot of times people get caught up, and I mean, I've been obviously guilty of this in the past. People get caught up in chasing specific numbers because they think it's what's going to make them throw far, instead of actually looking what's happening in the ring and seeing if strength is a deficit. I have to say, I've never had a thrower, I look back, I've never had a thrower go to a meet and throw and come back and say, you know what, I did everything right, I'm just not strong enough, that's why I didn't throw well today. It's usually, I warmed up at 65 feet and I threw 61 and fell apart technically. There's usually a flexibility issue, a tiredness issue, a timing issue, or whatever it may be. It's hardly ever a strength issue. So, and that's my point of kind of putting these numbers up here. And kind of go back along, getting back to Reese's numbers here. Again, with the squat, 182% of his body weight, that's 555. We've never gone much heavier than that. We've never seen a need. Also, Reese has had, again, a little bit of a history of some lower back trouble sometimes. So we really try not to put that back in jeopardy. So about 550 is, 250 kilograms is as heavy as we go. And like I said, that's why these numbers right here, 185% of body weight at 300 pounds, He's at 182 at 305, so that mixes in right in. A couple other things, and I'm going to talk specifically about Reese's training in another talk later on today, but his Olympic lifting is all right. It's not off the charts, but it serves its purpose. The one thing is Reese really hasn't done Olympic lifts in the last 3 years. They're taking him completely out of the program now just to avoid injury. And I've said that to people before, and they're like, what are you talking about? You don't do Olympic lifting? We did a lot of Olympic lifting. I've been working with Reese now. This is the 11th year I'm working with him. The first 7 years, we did a lot of Olympic lifting. I think Olympic lifting is very, very effective. What I'm saying is because of the back injury, or the potential for back injury, we had to find other avenues, and we couldn't use Olympic lifting because, yeah, we could get the lifting done, but he's not going to be able to throw, and it's all about the throwing. Now, Brad Snyder here, next on the list, he's about 6'4" and a half, almost 6'5", 282 pounds when he's usually his best competition weight. Now, he's a glider. His best stand throw is about 19 meters 20, and his best glide is 20 meters 86. And when he threw 1920, he also threw 2086 that day too. So his two personal bests for the stand throw and the glide were both on the same day. You can see his bench press is 193% of his body weight, 216% in the squat. He's probably the strongest thrower as far as pure lifting numbers I've had. 151% of his body weight is much more than he needs for what I've had up top there. But there again, he was a thrower that kind of grew up at a younger age, really pushing the strength. And so psychologically, he felt he needed to have the big lifting numbers to be able to throw well. And I kind of look at that as that's his weakness. If he doesn't, that he felt he needed to have those numbers, even if he was a little bit weaker than that, than what he'd like to be, he was still throwing pretty well. But he felt that he needed to push stuff in the weight room, and if you push it too much in the weight room, it's high risk training. When you look at this, this push jerk over here at 150% of body weight, that's getting up over 400 pounds. That's fairly risky when you're putting that much weight over your head again and again and again. So, like I said, I like to play the odds and try not to have too risky. You want to push the training, but you don't want to push it too much. Now, Brent Noon was a very strong lifter upper body wise. Look at that, 219% of his body weight in the bench press is 570 pounds. Extremely strong there. He's very good in the power lifts and fairly strong overall. And again, he's well over 21 meters in the shot put. Brian Miller threw 20.55. He was 310 pounds. You can see the percentages there aren't nearly as high as the other guys. And Reuben Williams is a smaller thrower. He's 5'9" and a half. So he's actually very good in the weight room because of the short leverage. He's extremely quick. Actually, he's probably way too quick for his. His PR is 20 meters 07. I really believe he's a 21 meters. She has 21 meters in him, but he throws like he's trying to throw 27 or 28 meters, and so I got to figure out how to slow him down out of the back. So we're still working on that. We got it figured out a little bit last year, and if he can slow down out of the back, I think he'll catch some big throws. But he has some pretty good percentage numbers here, like I said, because he is a little bit lighter. It's easier to get a higher percentage of your body weight when you are a lighter thrower. Now these two examples right down here, Kyle Helf, who's a Canadian thrower, Daniel Vanek, who's a Slovakian thrower. Actually, Daniel Vanek won the Slovakian championship. He beat Hoborak and Konopka this year for the Slovakian championship. And Kyle Helf was he's been the runner-up to Dylan Armstrong a few times in the Canadian championships. Kyle Helf's PR is 1898, so essentially 19 meters. And Daniel Vanek's PR is 1939. So they're low 19 meter throwers. They're guys that are trying to get up over 20 meters, to make their Olympic team. And there are two different type of throwers. I'm just kind of giving you some examples of numbers here. Kyle is very much a rhythm and feel thrower. He's not that big. He's about 6'1", so he's about 185 in height, and he's 227 pounds. And you can see his bench press, he's at 160% of his body weight, 161% of his body weight. His squat, is all right. His clean and his snatch for his body weight, I feel they're a little bit on the weak side. He's an example of a thrower where I actually think getting him a lot stronger in the weight room, That's one of the main things he needs to do is get maybe up to 235, 240 pounds and just get stronger. His rhythm and technique and timing are very good. His best stand throw is about 1550, and he's throwing 19 meters, so his conversion is pretty good right there. Daniel Vanek, on the other hand, is extremely strong. You look at those numbers, if you look at his raw numbers, he's as strong as these guys up here, but he's not throwing nearly as far. Obviously, as you say, the German coach told me, Kyle throws with many feelings and Daniel throws with many powers. And, through translation. So, Daniel actually just bench pressed. He wasn't supposed to do a heavy single, but he bench pressed 500 pounds last week and did it pretty easily. He probably could have done 515 if he needed to. And that's more, for throwing 19 meters, that's more than enough. And so with Kyle, we're actually pushing the weight room quite a bit. And with Daniel, we're trying to stay out of the weight room quite a bit and get more throwing in. So again, I want to give you some examples about trying to balance out training. Now, I haven't had quite as much experience with the high-level men, as with the high-level women. I wanted to give you, this is a chart right here that's kind of printed out from Dr. Eckhart Arbeit. I was doing a seminar with him with the IAAF back in '99, and I got this chart from him. And this is for women, and I'm pretty sure this is basically for gliders that are about 6'1", so they're fairly tall women. And if you look at the numbers here, the distance numbers and the age, and then the lifting numbers right here, the lifting numbers are pretty low. The jumping and running numbers are pretty good. So I'm just using this as an example. I'm not quite sure, again, if I agree with these numbers completely, but I just want to use this as an example of something where you're looking at the minimum numbers that you need for the lifting and then the minimum numbers for the jumping. And I tell you what, I don't have very many throwers that can do a standing triple jump I've come across that can do these numbers there on that end. That's pretty good right there. But again, when you're developing your athletes, obviously you want to develop a broad spectrum of training parameters. So these are the things you need to look at. Now, these are the numbers for, like I said, basic numbers here for 18 meters or so with the women's shot as far as percentages of body weight. And obviously, again, it's a sliding scale. As you get heavier, the marks or the percentages go down. And a couple of examples here. If you look at the two throwers I've had a chance to work with, Terry Steer and Leah Tunks, they're actually both about the same size, about the same weight. They throw, their ultimate throw, Terry throws a little bit farther than what Leah's thrown. I can tell you this, Terry Steer's best stand throw is about 1860. So it's better than Leah Tunks's. It's a lot better than Leah Tunks's, but their overall distances are only probably about 40, 50 centimeters apart in terms of PRs. If you look at their bench press mark, it's virtually the same, around 140% of body weight. The squat, Terry's very strong in the squat. She squats over double her body weight. And the Olympic lifting is roughly the same, in the same ballpark. Terry's a little bit stronger than Leah right there. Leah's also a little bit taller than Terry is as well. One thing about both Leah and Terry is they're both very good jumpers. And I'll show you some of those marks later on. But they're obviously very good athletes, more so just in the weight room. They're very good athletes out on the track when they're doing the running and jumping. Now, I want to talk a little bit about special strength here. The best form of special strength training, as I said before, is using heavy shots. And obviously these exercises mimic the movement as closely as possible in terms of acceleration patterns and movement speed. And when there's specific exercises in the weight room, but when you look at what you do in the weight room, if you're doing something with, holding onto a plate and twisting there or moving a bar, just realize, in your weight room, you're never letting go. You're accelerating, then decelerating, coming to a stop. The fastest lift in the weight room is the snatch, and you're never getting that bar moving more than 2.5 meters per second. When we're talking about shot putting here, when you're talking about elite shot putting, you're talking about release speeds of around 13 meters per second. So that's a lot faster than anything you'll see in the weight room. So when you're doing something like heavy shots and things of that nature, you're working at a much faster speed than what you're going to be working at, in the weight room. I personally like to use heavy shots for the stand throw, for the spinners, and also for the full movements and the gliders. With the gliders, we throw a lot of heavy shots. I don't throw heavy shots with the spinners. We actually train on the lighter side normally. Reese Hoffa right now trains with the 7K, so that's 15.5 pounds. And Adam Nelson, for the longest time, I mean since 2000, has been training with a 15-pound shot. Adam's belief is that whatever he can throw that 15-pound in practice, he can throw the 16 in the meet with the energy he gets from the meet. And Reese actually, the 15.5-pound shot, he threw that 22.41 last year in training, and then in London this past summer he threw 22.43. So that's pretty good conversion right there from the practice mark to the competition mark. So it's the last point I'm making right here, down here on the bottom, and this is extremely important, is you want to make sure the heavy implements do not affect the throwing technique and the timing. So if you're throwing heavy implements and you're throwing the 8K, for example, and you improve your 8K by 1.5 meters over a period of training, and you're throwing any which way just to get the extra distance, say, hey, I threw it that far, improved this much, that's really not the point. Everything's about how it's going to affect the competition implement. So you want to make sure that you're not developing heavy shot putting technique. Okay? And, again, I was talking to, doing a seminar with Eckhard Arbeit, and we were talking about Ulf Timmerman's training, and he was talking about how Ulf Timmerman, would throw an 8-kilogram shot, wearing a 19-kilogram weight vest, going across the ring with force plates, and they charted the acceleration pattern and the impulses on the force plates to make sure that the movement was exactly like it would be with the 16. Now, most of us don't have those resources, so yeah, I don't think any of us do. So, good question.
Would the heavy implement help your guy that's too fast off the back of the circle? Was it Kyle?
Reuben Williams. Yeah. I tell you what, I don't use the heavy implements with the spinners, because basically, and again, this is personally, when we throw in the heavy implements, we're usually all over the place. It throws our timing off. Right. And then so we'll spend a lot of time trying to throw the heavy implement well, and then sometimes we just never get it, and other times we do get it, but then when we go back to the regular implement, it just takes a long time to get time back with the regular implement. So that's been my personal experience, is throwing the heavy implements. I know what you're saying with getting the timing down, but with my experience, it's just been really hard to go back and forth and adjust the timing with the rotational technique. Now, with somebody going too fast out of the back, like Reuben Williams, for example, the one thing is that's a good idea. Or you could say, well, let's do the heavy implement and stop, just slow them down out of the back. But then the question is, when you go back to the regular implement, now that he doesn't have that heavier weight to supposedly hold him back, what's going to happen? I'd rather take the approach of him learning how to slow down no matter what with the regulation implement. This is what I did. I'll tell you right now what I did with Reuben last year, and he went from throwing about 1960 up to 2007. And this is what we did. I'll tell you the progression is, Reuben, the first thing Reuben would do is, he'd wind up, he'd come in, throw that left arm around, just go flying out, throw his upper body forward, sweep leg, go flying up, and just dive into the middle of the ring, over-rotate, base would be this wide. Everything is wrong. He'd still throw 1930. It was incredible. And where's Garrett Domkut's filming me right there? Thank you. You got some of the, you documented some of the footage when Reuben came over and threw, and he threw at 1969, I think. He was way in the bucket, locked out way over in the corner. And when he threw 2007, he's a little bit more balanced than that. But so Garrett up there, he's seen it firsthand. Oh, that's okay. I don't know if we need to look at it actually, but anyway, what I did with him was, I went back and I said, you know what, we're going to do this with the regulation implement. So Reuben can stand throw 16 meters pretty easily. I think his best stand throw is almost 17 meters when he really gets after it. But in a given practice, he can stand throw 16 meters. Then what I'd have him do is I would do a step in out of the back. So if I'm throwing in this direction, I just have him walk straight forward, and he's very good at just accelerating rotationally. He'd step in, rotate, and go right into a reverse and hit the throw. And I figured when he could get to 18 meters with the step in, he could probably get to 20 meters with the full throw. The step in, basically, when you turn out of the back and you hit this portion of the throw, that's where the step in begins. He has no speed whatsoever. So he was able to go from 0 to step in and generate 18 meters worth of distance. So then we took the step in, we went to a full throw, and I told him, I said, I want you to go, I said, in a step in, when you hit this position right here, you have no momentum whatsoever. I just want you to rotate slow enough so you're going maybe 1 meter per second. And he would just turn and kind of do a power step in into the middle, and he'd go like 1930 right away. And I'd say, kind of go a little bit faster. He'd go 1940, go a little bit faster. So it's very much tempo throwing in the back. But I developed it off the step in. And I said, go a little bit faster. Then at some point, he'd just go way too fast, and the ball would go flying, out of the sector in the wrong direction. And we just work on that, practice after practice, the same build-up, just beating it into his nervous system, beating into his nervous system. But the key was getting him to be patient coming out of the back and get him used to knowing that with hardly any momentum going into the middle at all, he could throw 18 meters. And all he needed to do was add a little bit of speed out of the back, and he could take that 18 up to 20. He always felt he needed to come in flying out of the back full speed to hit any type of the front of the throw, and that really wasn't the case. So just again to kind of reiterate, I shy away from using, and I'm not saying that I wouldn't recommend using the heavy shots for rotational throwers. It just hasn't worked for my people so much. We tend to throw on the lighter end of the spectrum because we're very rhythm-based with our throwing, and it's easier to work on rhythm with a little bit of a lighter implement than a heavy implement. Okay, we got our tape changed. We can get started again. I want to talk about some special strength exercises a little bit more. With these heavy shots, the normal conversion rate is about, again, it's about 5 feet for every 2 pounds, or I'd say, about 2 meters per kilogram, roughly somewhere around there. And the most common shots usually the 18-pound for men, the 4.5K for the women. Sometimes you go up to 5K for the women. It's hard, 5K for the women, that's quite a big jump. That's like going with a 9K with the men. That's fairly heavy. And I kind of think that for me, the heavy shot's a little bit more important for training for the gliders and the spinners. This footage, my cursor right here. This is you can play. This is Andrei Miknovich from Belarus, just doing a nice, easy 19-meter stand throw. This is at the warm-up track at Helsinki. He's a guy, he's almost 6'8". I think he's 204 is his height, so he's got a lot of leverage to work with there. And he's a glider, obviously. I was over watching him warm up in Osaka, and he stood through 20 meters, with the reverse. And then he was gliding right at 22 meters, but he's kind of falling out on those. But he held in like 21.40 or so at the warm-up track. And I thought he could have thrown a little bit. He ended up finishing third over in Osaka at 21.27. I thought he could have thrown a little bit further, but I think he's probably pressing a little bit as well. But he's a guy, that trains with a lot of heavy shots. I've heard 20 meters with a 9K for a full throw attributed to him. That's what I've heard. Not sure if it's true or not, but he's obviously a product of some heavy shot training. Now, here's a couple other exercises that we do, and this is obviously something we do in Reese's program, but my other throwers as well. We'll do standing bar twists here. The one thing that we do with these standing bar twists, though, is the level that we start at in the shot. So for each athlete, whichever level they start at, we get that level of knee flexion, and then you work the trunk twist or the bar twist in that plane. So this is an example, obviously. This is Chad McClendon. He's actually a glider. This is the bar twist just with the bar that he's doing here. And he's obviously fairly tall when he's doing this. When a guy like Reese is doing this, he's a lot lower. He'll be in his actual starting position. So we're working through a specific range of motion right there. And one thing that's very important is you got to make sure that you're balanced when you're turning out of the back, and that's one of Reese's problems a little bit. Is he tends to fall backward out of the back as he's turning, and when you're doing these bar twists here, you really have to maintain your balance when you're doing these. So it's a pretty good specific exercise. Here's a couple other just of my favorite exercises that we work in. This is maybe not so specific for shot putting. I mean, this is for all throws. It is a medicine ball throw for height with a jump in between. This is a 7K medicine ball right here. This particular thrower is a very good jumper. He's probably the best jumper that I've had. His vertical leap's about 94 centimeters from a stand, and his standing long jump's 355. So he's probably the best jumper I've had. And he's doing a 7K ball here. Usually the girls will do maybe a 4 or 5 kilogram ball. One nice thing here is there's no deceleration phase during the extension of the body. Like you might have with a narrow grip snatch or something like that, you're moving the bar pretty fast and getting good extension, but you have to decelerate the bar again to catch it at the top. Obviously, you can't really do this type of exercise in the weight room. We do a lot of rotational trunk work for the rotational throwers. This is a side sling with the medicine ball. And obviously, you want to work both sides equally. He's just working one side here, kind of from left to right. You want to work your right to left as well. Keep the feet off the ground at all times. And we try to go heavier with the medicine ball here. This is actually a 5 kilogram medicine ball that this thrower is throwing. The guy seated there is John Newell. He's actually a 19-meter shot putter and a 70-meter hammer thrower. So he's a unique combination. He's now the throwing coach in Michigan State. He's got a good job right out of college. Anyway, this is something that we'll work in usually in our conditioning circuits in the fall, and then we'll come back to this drill or this exercise every once in a while as a supplementary exercise during the season. And another exercise called these discus twists. You can do these in the gymnastics room on a glute ham raise machine. Chad's got probably 10-pound dumbbells here for the demonstration, but you want to be able to move comfortably. You want to work both sides equally, obviously. You usually work with 10 to 25-pound dumbbells with this exercise. And then the oblique leg roll. This is a good exercise because you can do a lot of different variations of this exercise. You can do it with bent knees. If you're not very good at it, you can do it with bent knees. It's a lot easier that way. This one's fairly hard. Then a little more advanced version of that, so using 2 medicine balls here. And this you can get a good stretch. It's a 3K medicine ball between the knees and a 2 kilogram medicine ball above the head. And so when, this is Trevor Snyder, he's former Canadian javelin champion, 77-meter javelin thrower. When his knees are touching the ground, he's getting very good separation. The weight of the balls has actually helped stretching him out a little bit here. These are all good trunk exercises to add in and work on, strength through a range of motion, especially for rotational throwers. And this is another exercise, trunk rotations right here. And this is something that, again, John's doing this and going counterclockwise. You want to go clockwise and counterclockwise. You want to work both sides equally. Usually what you're going to see with your athletes when you try this is they're going to have a weak side and then a strong side. So they're going to rotate. They may go clockwise fairly easily, and then they go back the other way, and they'll be fairly uncoordinated. So that'll show you something right there where you want, that's an area that you want to shore up and make sure they can do both ways equally. I remember I brought Lance Deal out to Georgia back in 2000 after the Olympics, and we did a hammer clinic, and we were doing a warm-up session. He had this as one of the warm-up exercises, and we had about 40 throwers out there, and they were doing this exercise, and 38 of the 40 throwers, right when they brought their legs out to the side, they just rolled over and just went for a little roll there. They just didn't have any coordination that way. Lance was doing these, and he just did he's like a helicopter. He's about ready to take off. He's going so fast. And to me, that showed you, and obviously Lance Deal's our American record holder, 82 plus meters in the hammer. That shows you some special strength and coordination that probably shows you why he can, throw the hammer 82 meters doing exercises like that. with such good technique and timing. Now, one running exercise that we do in the preseason is called 20 minutes of hell, although sometimes at the beginning of the year we start off with like 5.5 minutes of hell, something like that. And I got it from Judd Logan, and Reese actually, he hates this. I would say a third of my group really hates it. A third of my group loves it. Usually all the javelin throwers and those type of people love this type of stuff. This one girl right here, she's from Iceland, Sigrun Feldstedt. She loves this. She'll do like 85 minutes of hell. She just loves to stay fit. And then the other third's kind of indifferent, but they basically what it is you go out on, you can go to a soccer field or a football field, rugby field, whatever it may be, and you can put cones down. If you're on a American football field, you put them down the two end zones and you put one at the 50-yard line in the middle. So you have 3 cones and each one of them is 50 yards apart. And you're going to sprint 50 yards and then you're going to walk 100 yards. And sprint 50 yards and then walk 100 yards. And keep going for 20 minutes. And so, as Judd Logan said, if he went out and told his throwers, okay, guys, I want you to do 28 50-yard sprints, people would revolt and leave right away. So you kind of trick him, go, well, we're going to do this thing called 20 minutes of hell, you see, and you end up doing the same thing. So let me play this video here for you. You can kind of see what's going on. One person's walking and recovering. Now Sigrun here, she's in a recovery phase, and she's jogging during the recovery phase. That's typical her. She just wants to cover as much ground as possible. But basically, you end up just running and walking, running, walking. And if you have the wherewithal to do it, you'll chart the mileage. And obviously, when you're doing the exercise, you can't chart the mileage. But if your coach off to the side, you can sit there and kind of see how much ground they covered. I would say in 20 minutes, and again, we don't start with 20 minutes. We start with about 8 minutes, and the next 2 weeks later we do 10 minutes. 2 weeks later after that we go 12, and we work our way on up. When we do 20 minutes, 3,200 yards is good, very good for the women. 3,500 yards is very good for the men. Our all-time record is 4,007 yards by Bro Greer, and he promptly went up and threw up over in the corner after that. And obviously, if you want to increase your yardage during the exercise, you cut down your recovery period. Your sprints, you're not going to be able to speed those up very much, but Bro was pretty much jogging pretty fast during his recovery periods. So, and obviously, I think Reese's personal best is around 3,200. Adam Nelson did 3,500, but it's a good way to get in some running. And again, we don't usually do much running or sprinting much more than 100, 150 meters at all. The vast majority of it's more like 20 or 30 meter sprints. We're working very just short, quick stuff like that. But this way you can kind of make this type of training kind of fun, because we'll go out there. You can see there's 4 people in the picture here, but actually when we're doing this, there's about 13, 14 people on the field. And when you have your whole crew out there running, the people that are really dying, the other people can be there to kind of pick them up and cheer them on, and the people that are doing really well, they're just trying to beat everybody else. So it works out quite well. Okay. The jump test, one of the jump tests that I use for, and obviously we'll talk a little bit about norm-based field testing. Every once in a while, I think you got to throw some tests in there and see if your training's getting better or getting worse. Jump tests, to me, are also very good to test for overtraining. And usually I've found that the vertical leap's very sensitive to being overtrained. So, vertical leap's a very easy test, and the Abalakov test is a form of a vertical leap test. I'll explain it if you don't know what it is in a little bit more detail and what we did right here and what we're getting from it. But the vertical leap's a pretty easy test. It's not very hard to learn. You're just pretty much jumping up as high as you can. Standing long jump's a nice test, but if you don't know how to land, you can really compromise your distance right there. And obviously, all these tests are relative. So, in the standing long jump, as far as pure distances, somebody that's a lot taller is probably going to, all things being equal, will jump farther than somebody that's a little bit shorter. But the vertical leap test is usually my favorite test to run. Now, the Abalakov test is basically a series of 5 measurements, And what we do is we'll take an athlete and we'll test their vertical leap just to body weight, okay? And then we will put a weight vest on them and add 5% of their body weight to that weight vest. Then we'll have them, and we use a Vertec to measure the height. And so we'll put a 5% of their body weight into the vest, put that on them, and then they'll go and jump again and take a reading. And obviously, usually they won't jump quite as high as they did with their body weight. Then we'll add 10% to the weighted vest and have them jump again. Then 15% and then 20%, okay? So this chart right here, for example, I have, let me use the pointer here. I have 5 athletes right here. 3 of them are very highly trained athletes. Trevor Snyder, Koji Murafushi, and Andres Hocklitz. And 2 here, Nate Rolfe and Zach Hunter, are young collegiate athletes. And Zach Hunter's, he's about a 55-meter hammer thrower. Nate Rolfe's actually, he's a very talented thrower. He's going to be very good. He's just still very young and underdeveloped. Nate's almost a 59-meter discus guy and about a 67-meter hammer guy. So he's a pretty good thrower. Andres Hocklitz, 80-meter hammer thrower. Koji Murafushi, you know who he is. And Trevor Snyder is a 77-meter javelin thrower. His brother is Brad Snyder, the Canadian record holder in the shot put. Trevor, pound for pound, the strongest thrower I've ever had. He can, at 201-pound body weight, he cleaned 370 pounds. And he snatched over 120K, his squat, everything, all his tests. He's extremely strong and well developed. So what you'll see is this first number right here is the body weight result. So everybody at the body weight is at 100%. That's their base mark, okay? So this mark, and actually the axis doesn't read it here, but this right here is the percentage of their of what their max jump is. So at body weight, everybody jumped 100% of their max, okay? Then the next reading over here is at 5%. When we added 5% of their body weight, people dropped down a little bit, and they jumped maybe 95% of that distance. So for example, I know the raw score, Koji Murafushi at body weight, we did this test in November, he did 38 inches. And then when we added 5%, he did 36.5 inches. So he dropped down just a little bit. And Koji actually he's the yellow line right here. It's a perfectly straight line. He dropped, every time we added 5%, he dropped 1.5 inches. So you can kind of do the math there. So he's 38, 36.5, 35, 33.5, and then 32. And you'll notice there's pretty much a distinct barrier here. You have these 3 athletes right here are all kind of grouped together, and those are the 3 highly trained athletes with higher training ages, better body weight percentages in lifting, better overall vertical leaps and all that, and basically better throwers. And then these 2 throwers here are the younger collegiate throwers. So basically what the Abalakov test shows you is the younger lower level athletes, they dropped off a lot more steeply in their performance when you started adding more weight. And the higher trained athletes didn't drop off as much. Generally, the steeper the line here, the steeper the line, it may imply a greater benefit to further weight training, meaning they could benefit from some more training. They're still young and have a lot more room to go. If the line's pretty flat, then they aren't going to benefit quite as much. They're already that realm of training's pretty much already been exhausted, okay? Now, I'll take this, it's a bear to, when you test 14 people in the Abalakov test and you're always changing weights around, it's a lot of work. So we're not doing this test all the time. We're doing it every once in a while, and we'll do it year to year. But what I'm looking for, hopefully, is that this line right here, as the year goes on, this line starts to rise up and get flatter. And then from year to year, hopefully, it rises up too, as they're making progress. So this is one of our evaluation tests. And like I said, and what I've seen so far, I've been doing this test for a few years. When people get better and that line gets flatter, usually their performances are generally going up. Now, let me talk about some specifics in the jump tests. Standing long jump, and again, this is for high-level shot putters. Obviously, with the standing long jump, the results are going to be varied based on the height of the individual. But obviously, when you're working with one individual, you want to look at relative improvement. So if they're standing long jumps 3 meters and they jump 3:10 the next time, hey, that's maybe a month later. That's pretty good improvement. So generally for male throwers, international level throwers, jumps over 350 are just excellent. That's the high end. That's the far end of the bell curve there. Over 330 is very good. I think that's probably what you're going to see a lot of when you look at like at the Olympic final or the finalists. That's usually most of those guys can jump around 330 or so, and then over 320 is considered good. Now, obviously, if you get a thrower that's 170 kilograms, I'm not sure if they're going to be jumping 350, but hey, they're 170 kilograms, so in that force equals mass times acceleration, the M's real high. So if that person can move at all, they'll probably be throwing pretty far. For female throwers, 3 meters is excellent. Over 290 is very good, and over 280 is considered good. And I'll give you some examples here of the athletes that I've come across. Adam Nelson's about 325. Brad Snyder's about 325 as well. Brian Miller was 295. That's not all that great, but he was a spinner. He's 310 pounds, so he was actually at 310 pounds, he could move very fast rotationally. So, if Brian would just get up to 305, 3 meters 05, that would be excellent improvement for him. Leah Tunks is a bit over 3 meters. That's excellent, and Terry is just under 3 meters. So, very good marks right there. The jump test, the vertical jump, again, for me, it's a very good test to measure training fatigue. So we go in to test a vertical leap, and some people really drop off. I'll usually ask them what's happened, and they usually end up saying, yeah, the last 2 weeks I've been sick, or if they're the students, they might have been studying for exams and things like that. There's usually a reason. And we use the Vertec, to measure the vertical jump. For international level male throwers, usually over 90 centimeters is excellent. That's the very, very high end of the curve there. Over 80 centimeters is very good, and over 75 centimeters is good. And for the women, 75 centimeters is excellent, 70 centimeters is good, 70 centimeters is very good, and 65 is good. And Adam Nelson, when he's in shapes, at 94 centimeters. Brad Snyder at 82. Brent Noon at 81. Reese Hoff is at 75 centimeters. I remember speaking with Werner Gunther, this is back in 1997. He told me his best is 110 centimeters, which is outstanding. He's also a 210 high jumper as well. And when he was weighing his competition weight, he high jumped 2 meters even. I think it's probably a European Cup, and they're short a high jumper, so he jumped in there. Terry Steer had a vertical leap of 68 centimeters. Now for running and sprinting and jumping, we basically, what we do is we do a lot of stair sprints and stair jumps. I like the stair sprints and stair jumps quite a bit because you're jumping up and you're not coming all the way down. You're kind of working your way up the stairs, so it's a little bit easier on the body. This time last year, I remember for the team, I felt we had done a really good job of doing our running and sprinting, and everybody's looking faster, so of course I had to go out, and we had a nice warm day in December in Georgia, and we went and did some flying 20s, and I think we blew 3 hamstrings right before Christmas, so I'm not going to do that again. And my point being is I was all excited because I knew we were going to get personal bests, and actually we did get a lot of personal bests, but 2 of my guys got set back in their training about 3 or 4 weeks. Luckily, they weren't indoor throwers, they were outdoor throwers, so they had time to recover. Their season didn't start really until about April. But the point of me telling you that little story there is I really, when we're doing, running, jumping, and sprinting, especially with shot putters, you're talking people on the biggest end of the spectrum in athletics, you really got to watch for overtraining injuries and really be careful. And so stair sprints and stair jumps I like quite a bit. A lot of the injuries I see occur are usually when you're coming down off a jump and you're decelerating off a sprint. It's not the acceleration, it's the slowing down part that usually gets you. So I like hill sprints as well. And we do quite a bit of short sprints, 20 to 50 meters. And we'll do some type of short sprints with resistance, as in, sleds, weighted sleds. And our quote-unquote long sprints are usually 100 to 150 meters, where we're just kind of working on opening up our stride. And we'll do that usually earlier in the year, in fall training, maybe into the winter a little bit. Hurdle jumps, we do some of those. We always do them on the grass or on a soft surface. And we usually try to stay off the aprons. And we'll do some box jumps, but I tell you, again, we don't do a whole lot of box jumps for the most part. Maybe the javelin throwers might do a little bit more, but for shot putting, what I'm talking about here, don't do a whole lot of box jumps. Stick mostly with hurdle jumps. We do some type of running and running drills all year round. The jumping, we put in for little bouts at a time, 2 or 3 weeks of jumping, then we'll stay away for a while, then put it in strategically when we need it. I haven't been able to have people jump all year round all the time, just too much patellar tendonitis and things of that nature developing. Going back to a few more special strength exercises, this is another one that we do. Oops. Where'd my cursor go? Here it is. This is a trunk rotation around a stick. And we obviously want to work both clockwise and counterclockwise on this exercise. We'll do this facing upwards, as Chad is right here, and we'll do it facing down. You can put a weighted vest on if you want to add some weight. Trevor right here, who's holding the stick, he's only holding it in here just a little bit. Normally, I'd have him hold it a little bit lower and really stick it in there quite far. So Chad really has to go down very deeply and trace a big, wide arc with his shoulders. He's doing a fairly tight circle right there, but that's what we got for this footage on this one. But this is one of my favorite, when we go in the gymnastics room and train, this is one of my favorite exercises to do. We always make sure we hit this one. One thing that we do year-round is our hurdle circuits. And these aren't hurdle jumps. These are walk-through hurdle circuits. And we have 4 main drills that we do. We have a hurdle walk-through, and we usually set up the hurdles, 10 in a row, just like this. We'll set up the hurdle basically based on the individual. So for this group right here, there's about 5 people doing this circuit, this hurdle circuit here. They're all about the same height. If I have my whole group, my college group doing it, for example, and we have 14 people out there, we'll usually have 2, maybe 3 sets of hurdles, and we'll have like the shorter people on one, the real tall people on a different set, and the people in the middle set. This particular drill I'm going to run right here is a 180-degree walkthrough, and this is very good I like to use it for rotational shot put. Usually this drill right here, my better throwers are really, really good at this. Okay, now regular walkthrough, they're just going to have their hands on their head, their hands up over their head, and they're just kind of walking through the hurdles just straight on. This is the 180-degree walkthrough right here. We'll do over and unders as well. I'll play this through a couple times. And when we do this 180-degree walkthrough, we'll go through a few times. We'll go clockwise and counterclockwise. I'll show you a clip of the frame. I have a frame-by-frame sequence of Reese throwing from last year that I'll show you in the next talk. I got a clip of him when he's reversing and jumping around, holding it in. You'll see a very similar position to what you'll see doing these type of drills. So this is kind of specific for rotational shot putters. It's good for discus throwers and any type of rotational thrower, really. Over-unders, that's where we're stepping over a hurdle, and then the next hurdle will step underneath it, then up and over, and then underneath it. So when we go underneath the hurdle, we have to decide how high we want to set up these hurdles here. If I really want to make it just cruel and unusual, we'll keep the hurdles all the same height here. So you can imagine a guy like Reese trying to go under one of these little hurdles right there. It's not going to happen. So when the big guys go through and do that, we'll go, regular size hurdle go over, then we'll bump this up to 39 inches, and then low, and then 39 inches. So it's over, under, over, under. And then the zigzag over, under is we'll set up hurdles, one facing forward, one to the side, then one facing forward, one to the side. So they're going to step over and then go step under, and step over and then under. And we'll also do that with the rotation as well, both clockwise and counterclockwise. So it's a nice little circuit. And obviously the zigzag over under hurdle circuit's the toughest one. Now, again, this is another set of exercises we do, and we stay in touch with this all year round, is the agility circuit. And usually we'll either do the drills by themselves, such as the high knees, the butt kick, straight legs, karaoke, side shuffle with arm circles, forward skip with arm circles, A skip, B skip. And we may not do all. These are an example of some of the exercises we do. We may pick 5 and do them 2 or 3 times with a bleed into a sprint. So we'll go 20 meters doing high knees and then into a sprint for another 20 meters. We'll do that twice and then go to butt kicks. We may not do this whole long list. That's a lot of running right there. We'll pick 5 one day, and then the next time we come around to this exercise, we'll pick another different 5, and the next time we come around, another combination of 5, and so on and so forth. But I think it's always good to stay in touch with this. And if you do this year after year after year, your mobility and agility tends to get much, much better. Okay, a couple last ones here. I'm just kind of finishing up here. Now these exercises here, I'm just kind of show them to you. To be honest with you, don't really do these that much for the shot. This is more for discus and javelin. This is the skin the cat. This guy right here is a unique combination. He's a 62-meter discus guy and a 72-meter javelin guy doing the skin the cat in the gymnastics room. It's tough for a high-level shot putter to be this flexible with the upper body. But this is an example of an upper body flexibility exercise. And then this one here is called the bird's nest. This is Trevor doing it. Obviously the javelin throwers do quite a bit of this stuff. Very good stretching exercise for the trunk right there. So he's basically doing an inversion, flipping his feet through the rings and letting his chest kind of drop down towards the ground. Now, let me give you a couple more exercises that we do here. One-legged jumps in place. It's another good exercise that we do. Again, this is somewhat advanced. This is fairly hard to do. I mean, Chad's one of our best jumpers I mentioned before, so that's why I kind of picked him to demonstrate that here. And I actually got this exercise from Volker May, who's still the world junior record holder in the triple jump from East Germany. This is one of his jumping exercises. And actually, that's the last slide right there. I want to take some time. We got 7 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes there. I don't want to cut into lunch because lunch is the most important part of the day as far as I'm concerned. I just want to talk about, I'm talking about just shot put training. I'm telling you, I could sit here and talk for 3 or 4 hours. And I'll hopefully have a few questions off the side later on. But I want to talk about the rotational shot and the glide. And I'll first talk about, in general, and a lot of this is going to kind of start with the men first, but in general, I think in the long run, you can probably generate further throws with the rotation than with the glide. The conversion off the stand throw is usually much bigger with the rotation. I also think as far as in developing big time distances, something like over 20 meters, I think you can get to 20 meters a lot faster with the rotation than with the glide. We're talking to the men right now. And for example, and I've had many discussions about this, but if you look at 22, 23-year-olds around the world, especially over the last 10 years or so, I look at the top gliders that are out there today. They're thrown over 21 meters, like a Ralph Bartels or Andre Miknovic. When those guys were 22, 23 years old, they were throwing about 20 meters 20. It's just a little over 20 meters of that age, and then they kept on improving. Memo Martinez was the same way. That's about the distance they had at that time. With the spinners of that age, and I can definitely say this over in the U.S., but you can look at somebody like Carl Myerscough too. At that same age, we have people throwing over 21 meters at the same age. They're getting a lot more distance at the same time. And it's a pretty competitive event, so that's part of the reason I think the glides is dying out in the United States is if you're going to make a career of it, you got to be one of the top 5 guys, and you got to be one of the top 5 guys at age 24 or 25. You need to throw over 21 meters at that age, and you just can't get there that fast with the glide. It takes a lot longer time to develop that specific strength. You know, with the glide, if you want to be at the world-class level, your stand throw, if you look at Maevsky, look at the top gliders from the World Championships, you know, Miknovich is at 20 meters at the stand throw. Maevsky's at 1980 in the stand throw that I've seen. Bartels can stand throw 20 meters, and these are the guys that are, you know, gliding almost 21 or over 21 meters. You have to get that stand throw up there. The conversion is going to be maybe 2 meters at best. Now, Reese Hoffa, for example, can stand throw. His personal best in the stand throw, really getting after it, 17:35. Right now, he won't stand much more than 16:50, 17 meters. He could if he wanted to, but we don't really use the stand throw to throw for distance. We use it as a systems check. When he can comfortably stand throw 17 meters, on that day, he's usually good for about 21:50 at least. So you do the math right there and go, that's about 4.5 meters. On a good day, he's adding 5 meters. Adam Nelson can stand throw. His personal best is just over 18:30. That's excellent, especially for a guy that's 6'1". You know, that'll stand up with anybody. Reese and Adam, both when they stand throw, they throw with more of a rotational style stand throw. It's a little bit more of a rotational wrap up and unwinding as opposed to a very just linear stand throw like we saw Miknovich doing right there. I personally, when I'm teaching younger throwers, I usually like to have them glide first, and then if they have an aptitude for the rotational technique, add that in a little bit later on. But it just depends what your goals are and what your situation is and what type of time you have. I do think it's extremely important, you know, with the shot put, 85% of the final release speeds developed in the power position. So when you get back onto double support, after whatever, you know, technique you're doing, you're going to generate, you know, 85% of your final release speed. So generally, when you come in that power position, the ball's going to be moving about 2.5 meters per second, and then by the time it leaves your hand at full extension, it's going 13.5 meters per second. So having said that, I think it's extremely important that the athlete, since so much of the final distance is produced out of that power position, or what you do in that power position, you got to have a good feel for hitting that finish. And so for that reason, that's why we spend a lot of time when I'm teaching beginners to work on that stand throw and develop a good hit and a good release and good release mechanics. And usually when we're going to go from a stand throw and actually put some movement behind it into the power position, usually the glide's the most consistent way to get into that power position and hit it. Now, the question I always get is coach, when should you take an athlete? When do you go to the spin and when should you stay in the glide? When should you switch over? And I would say this, when an athlete, if they're gliding, if they can comfortably do a South African or a full throw and comfortably get close to the distances that they're developing with the glide, then it's time to switch over. So for example, if you have a 50-foot shot putter that glides 50 feet, if you give them the shot and they try a South African and they're messing around with it and they can find 48 feet, if they can get to 48 feet pretty comfortably right away, it may not be 50 yet, but they can find it right away, odds are with a little bit more work on that rotational technique, they'll probably well exceed 50 feet later on. And so now if they're going 40 feet, 41 feet, that's too far away. They go, oh, coach, it's the wave of the future. We got to do it. I'd still keep them in the glide because 41 feet's not close to 50. I'll tell you a quick story about an example of when I had to throw a switch from the glide to the spin. When I first got to Georgia, at the university, I had two male throwers that were kind of walk-ons. They were just guys that showed up and were throwing, and they actually both were pretty talented and ended up being pretty good throwers. And the one guy, his name was Matt Eichholz. He was 6'4", about 275 pounds, and he was a 50-meter discus thrower. And, he's 19 years old at the time, big, strong kid, and he had glided in high school 52 feet, so 16 meters with the 5.4. So that's pretty average, really. And when I got there in the fall, I said, look, you're going to throw shot this year. And so we went out for the first day of practice, and he was a glider, and he threw 14 meters with a 12-pound shot. And I was like, oh, man, this is going to be a long year. We're going to get killed. And so we worked really hard in the glide all fall. December came around. He's up to 50 feet with a 16. So he improved quite a bit. He goes home for Christmas break. We all go home. We come back in January to get back to school. And he goes, Coach, I was messing around with the spin. He goes, I threw 57 feet with the 16-pound over break. I'm just going, that's just BS. There's no way. And so she's making this up. So I said, you know what? I'll give you a tryout. First day of practice, you can just go ahead and knock yourself out with a spin. Well, you know what? He started doing South Africans. It was pretty ugly, but he threw 54 feet, falling all over the place. I go, you know, that's not quite 57, but I see a lot of hope here. You know, I see him throwing 54 feet. We might be able to work something out. So we started pursuing the spin. And his first meet he threw 48 feet, second meet he threw 48 feet, third meet he threw 49, and his last indoor meet he threw 50 feet 8 or something like that. So that wasn't bad. We go outdoors, first outdoor meet like 16:30, and he ended up throwing 17:38 at the end of the year. That's 57 feet, quarter of an inch. So there's a classic case of the guy wanting to spin. I was saying no, and he proved me wrong. And so again, a little anecdotal evidence right there. And that's one of the happenings that really, you know, that really solidify my belief in that when you can kind of comfortably move that shot, even if it's ugly and you're falling out of the ring, if you can find a way to make it go rotationally, you just need to kind of stick with it, gradually tighten up the technique and keep it in the ring, and that's probably what's going to work the best. You know, as far as height of throwers and body types and things like that, you know, obviously I think the spin is the great equalizer for people like Reese Hoffa and Adam Nelson and maybe Andy Bloom in the U.S. in the past, where if those guys were gliders, they might not even made Olympic team or World Championship team. They'd be 20-meter throwers instead of 22-meter throwers. But on the other hand, you have, if you look at a couple of the other top spinners, I mean, obviously, you know, a guy like Rutger Smith, Christian Cantwell, Dan Taylor, these guys are all pushing 2 meters, and they're fitting it inside the ring too. So I really think almost anybody can work with the rotation. Obviously, the glide, you're going to have a huge advantage in the glide if you have better leverage. And if you look at the best gliders, you look at the World Championships, Majewski's like well over 2 meters tall, and Miknovic is a little bit over 2 meters tall. So those guys are obviously going to have a huge advantage. Bartels isn't that tall, but he's powerful. He's got a 20-meter stance. That sure helps. On the women's side, again with the spin, obviously if you look at the World Championship final, the girl from Italy is in there rotating, but pretty much everybody else is gliding. And people ask me, hey, when are the women, how come the men are spinning so much and the women aren't? And I just don't think with the powers that be, meaning the people that are winning all the medals in the women's shot, they're all gliding. And they're going to continue to glide until somebody beats them with the rotation. Then once that starts happening, if somebody rotates and they're beating a glider all the time, everybody's going to start rotating. When's that going to happen? 10, 15, 20 years from now? I'm not sure. Probably at least 6, 7, 8 years. We'll see. Most of our top throwers in the United States, the women's side, are rotational throwers. And if you look at those girls that are rotating, if you were to have them glide, they wouldn't be near the distance. They're throwing a lot further with the rotation. Jill Camarena, who's our top thrower, she's thrown 1943, I think, or 1934, something. I think 1943 or 42, which is a very good mark. That's her best throw with the rotation. She was at 1825 with the glide, so she was a pretty powerful thrower. But she found a way to kind of get an extra meter with the rotation. You know, do I think that I think it's with the strength that the women have relative to the weight of the ball, I think it's easier for them to maximize their distance with the glide a little bit, get to a good level a little bit sooner than the men with the glide. And that's why you're seeing more women gliding right now. With the rotation, I think the farthest rotating thrower we've had is probably Camarena, I think, and I think that's true. She's 1943, so we haven't had a 20-meter thrower yet, so we'll see what happens there. But I think either technique obviously can be effective. I can definitely say on the men's side, since there's much more experience with the rotation, that's probably what's going to yield the best results in the long run for a lot of throwers. Again, it's about 1:15 right now. Obviously, I could talk on the subject 2 more hours, but any questions offhand? I know I've been going kind of fast here. If not, obviously, you can go catch me in the hall or at lunch or whatever. I'm glad to talk to you about shot putting. Thank you very much.
One quick thing.
Yes.
Don, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'll be back.